So today's movie review is going to be on an animated movie, which is titled Tom and Jerry, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And, as you can tell by the title and the thumbnail, yeah, you should know that this movie is awful. In fact, it's probably one of the worst animated movies I've ever seen in 2017. Why, you may ask? Well, let's begin. First off, I'm going to start off with the story. And to start off with it, I'm going to ask a simple question. Have any of you ever seen the original Willy Wonka film? If you said yes, then you also said yes to also seeing this movie. Here's my biggest problem with the story here. It's a shot-for-shot rehash of the original Willy Wonka film. I know that is just one issue and that shouldn't affect the whole film, but here's the thing. This problem is continuously happening over and over again, making the entire plot predictable. But of course, they did try to throw in Tom and Jerry and the villain Slugworth, which he's completely pointless here. Trust me, I'll get more into that later. What they tried to do with Tom and Jerry and Slugworth in this movie was try to throw in them just to try to trick the audience into thinking that it's different, even though me and many other people are not fooled. We noticed nearly everything that they rehashed. And speaking of pointless scenes, there's one part in the movie that literally doesn't serve a purpose. There's one part in the film where Tom and Jerry are going to the candy shop and stealing Wonka's candy bars and giving them to Charlie and his family, and then returning them to the shop. It's one of many scenes in this movie that serve absolutely no purpose, along with Slugworth's song about how he wants to steal Wonka's factory. Oh, and not only does Slugworth not serve a purpose, Tom, Jerry, and even Tuffy, which is a new character that they added in the franchise for some reason, they don't serve a purpose here either. All they're here to do is outwit Slugworth, and that's it. You could have easily taken them out of the film and nothing would change at all. Except for Slugworth, because I'm going to go more in depth with him in a little bit when I get to the characters. But honestly, he's the only character besides the main characters of the Willy Wonka film that actually serves a purpose here, only at the end, not during the rest of the movie. By the way, something I realized while watching this film is that it's trying to be a crossover in a way that is like the Hanna-Barbera and Surf's Up WWE crossovers. However, those were actually trying to be a WWE crossover, and not someone else's story that just added recognizable characters in the background. This, on the other hand, is exactly what I'm talking about when I say that they just took someone else's story and added characters in the background. In fact, it's barely even a crossover at all. It feels like it was originally going to be an animated version of Willy Wonka, but at the last minute they were like, "Hey guys, I have no idea for this animated Willy Wonka movie. Let's turn it into a crossover with Tom and Jerry. After all, we did the same thing with Tom and Jerry and the Wizard of Oz and many others. Let's do the same thing with this." If that's the case, then Warner Brothers, I have a simple message for you. If you want to make an animated version of Willy Wonka, make an animated version of Willy Wonka. And if you want to do a crossover, then do a crossover. Don't just add in recognizable characters in the background and just rehash the story. And even if you're going to make an animated version of Willy Wonka, don't rehash the story, because it will make the entire plot completely predictable. And also, for the crossover part, why not just make new animation and new voices for the characters? Otherwise, it will just be a confused mess. and it will be completely predictable. I know I've gone on for way too long about the story here, so I'm going to move on because I already got an entire page talking about some aspects of the story. So I'm going to move on to the animation. Oh man, this is an interesting topic for me to talk about. Now, before I get into what I think about the animation, I do have a few positives to point out. When it comes to the backgrounds in this film, they do look nice, giving a nice animated visual representation of the original live-action film. And when it comes to the design of the characters, they do try to give out a cartoony look in terms of the designs. And honestly, it doesn't look that bad. Well, sometimes. And last but not least, the best part of the animation, along with the backgrounds, is the effects of the film. Whether it would be with Violet turning purple or Mike TV being transported into being tiny, the effects actually look pretty good. And it isn't ruined by anything by any means. Neither is the backgrounds. Well, I think that the designs of the characters are a little ruined thanks to the expressions that they make, but I'll get to that when I get to my problems. But the positives quite possibly end there. I'm going to get my first problem out of the way, and this might be a little nitpick to talk about, but when we get into the 40-minute mark, that one scene where Gus falls into the chocolate river had an animation goof that I noticed even without paying much attention to the animation. When he falls into the chocolate pool, which is clearly chocolate, you would think that the animators would animate him being covered in chocolate, right? No, when he comes out of the river, he looks like he wasn't even affected by it at all. I know people will probably consider this to being a nitpick, but however, when you take a look at the original Willy Wonka film, when Gus actually fell into the chocolate river, he actually looked like he fell into the chocolate river. Here though, he looks like he wasn't even affected by it, and it looks more like he fell in water than a chocolate pool. And this mistake that they made with the animation isn't just a minor thing. Actually, no. It's huge. It's a huge animation mistake that they clearly made for an animated movie that even I noticed. Next, there's the character animation. And there's also the designs of the characters. When it comes to the designs of the characters, I did say that they did look good, but when it comes to them wanting to do expressions, wow, it is laughable. I mean, I gotta say this right now. Hey internet, I have new meme faces for you. And finally, there's the character animation. Okay, I will say this. Tom and Jerry's character animation is pretty energetic and fine. But when it comes to them wanting to animate the humans, I see a big downgrade in that. When it comes to them wanting to animate the humans, a lot of their animation is very glitchy, choppy, stilted, and sometimes they even reuse a lot of animation, especially on Willy Wonka. When I was wanting to scan through the film to find that scene where Gus falls into the chocolate river, I noticed that Wonka's animation was reused quite a few times. And what I'm trying to say is, the animation where he was sipping out of a teacup, they reused animation from that until he bites out of the teacup. When it comes to the animation at first glance, it may not look too bad, but when you actually scan through the film, you'll see its true colors right there. And finally, there's the characters. Keep this in mind, guys, because of the fact that the writing is awful, good luck finding any characters here that aren't bland or pointless. First, there's the two main characters of the film, and Tom and Jerry themselves. Like I said before, both of them are completely pointless here. All they are here to do is outwit the pointless villain Slugworth. Sure, the other Willy Wonka characters do name drop them, and Willy Wonka himself said that there was a cat in the factory, but however, if you took him away from all those other scenes, nothing would be affected at all. And this might be weird for me to point out, but I feel as if Warner Brothers are using them to make them the next Scrat from Ice Age because of them interrupting a lot of the scenes with them doing shenanigans. And lastly, because Tom and Jerry take up more screen time than Charlie, it affects his actual character development because of him wanting to make his family happy by getting them food, and actually wanting to move them into Willy Wonka's factory in the original film. Then there's Tuffy, and he's a very lackluster character. His only trait is that he dreams of becoming an Oompa Loompa. He serves no other purpose to the film other than to help Tom and Jerry on their journey to warn Willy Wonka about Slugworth, and that's pretty much it. So he's just as pointless here as Tom and Jerry. And then there's the villain of the film, Slugworth, in which he does not serve any purpose here. Why is he pointless in this film? Well, because in the ending of the film, he admits that he wasn't a villain throughout the entire film. Then what was the point of every other scene that tried to build up the fact that he was a villain? Filler? I'm not joking when I say this, but that ending scene goes completely towards Ice Age Collision Course in terms of fooling the audience into thinking that that character is a villain, where you build up the entire film with these characters being a villain, and then at the end you say, hey, we're not a villain, so haha, April Fools. However, unlike Tom, Jerry, and Tuffy in this movie, he actually does serve a purpose in this film. Well, only in two scenes, because in the original Willy Wonka film, he only appeared in two scenes. One was a dark alley scene, and one was in the ending to give us a twist ending that Slugworth was actually working for Willy Wonka, and he wasn't actually convincing Charlie that he was a villain towards Willy Wonka. As for the rest of the characters from the original Willy Wonka film, they are predictable, just like with the story, and that goes for the songs as well. Before that part where Willy Wonka was like, Charlie, break the rules, you get nothing, you lose, good day, sir. Yeah, that is in this film. I knew it before I watched that scene in this movie. That's seriously how predictable this movie is, along with the songs that are being sung. Because all that material that was done in this film was already done in the original film. At best, all these characters can be described as bland and predictable, but at worst, all these characters can be described as pointless, not adding anything to the movie, or they can be there just to add filler and pad out the movie's runtime. Overall, Tom and Jerry, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is nothing more but than something that is meant to be a soulless and heartless cash grab off of Tom and Jerry and Willy Wonka's name, with the lazy writing that is a shot-for-shot rehash of the original film, animation that doesn't look that bad, but in execution you can see its actual colors, and characters that are either bland or pointless wastes of time. Honestly, so far, this is my least favorite animated movie of 2017, up to this point. Any other movies that I've seen this year, I gave below average ratings to, like Surf's Up 2, Rock Dog, The Boss Baby, and Spark, were movies that I didn't like. However, those films' real downfall is that they were generic with the exception of Surf's Up 2. And at least with Surf's Up 2, as bad as it was with rehashing the first Surf's Up, at least it was different with how it executed the scenes, and you could actually call it a crossover. On the other hand, its big downfall is not that it's generic, it's a rehash of a pre-existing property, and it doesn't do anything different with the execution. Every single scene that I thought was going to happen in this movie did happen, and there was not a single scene that I didn't think was predictable. The entire thing was completely predictable, and I got everything that I expected from this film. When I first saw the trailer for this film, I expected it just to be a boring crossover with another story like the other Tom and Jerry movies, but however, it surpassed my low expectations. I don't know if there will be an animated movie worse than this, since we are only in July and there is only 8 animated movies left in the year. And the Emoji Movie, or should I say possibly the Norm of the North of 2017, and the Nut Job 2 might actually have potential to be worse than this film, but just because 2 movies that are coming soon could possibly be worse than this, that doesn't mean that this movie is off the hook so easily. So I'm going to give Tom and Jerry, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory a 2 out of 10. I think it's awful. My best recommendation for this film is to just skip it entirely and just stick with the original film, or I would also recommend the 2005 remake too. Sure, it isn't as legendary as the 1971 film, however, it actually did something new with the characters that the original movie didn't, like giving Willy Wonka a backstory, or actually doing something different with the effects that they used in Willy Wonka's factory. Although I will admit, those pop songs were very forgettable. Anyways, now that I'm done talking about Tom and Jerry, Willy Wonka, and the Chocolate Factory, let's take a look at how 2017 is going on by itself. Wow. Just when I thought that the year was starting to pick up with movies like Captain Underpants and Cars 3, and with Despicable Me 3 being an okay movie. After all those good movies / okay movies, the year started to make a U-turn and take its way back to the dark ages of the year, where we got a tidal wave of bad animated movies. Near the beginning of the year, sure, we did get good movies like the Lego Batman movie and okay movies like Smurfs: The Lost Village, but you still had to go through Surfing Penguins that rehashed the story, Dogs That Played Rock and Roll, in which even reading my notifications is more interesting than actually watching the movie, A Baby in a Suit that pretty much has the same effects as Rock Dog, and a movie that doesn't have any clue what it wants to do, so it basically rips off every other space movie and other animated movies from last year and even from this year. And guess what? We're not even out of that dark age yet, because we still have 2 bad animated movies before we possibly get to the rest of the year that has nothing but good or okay movies. We're supposed to be getting the Emoji Movie in 2 days, and in August we're supposed to be getting the Nut Job 2. Oh, and by the way, to add on to that point about how 2017 is going so far, I decided to add up all the ratings that I gave for every animated movie that I watched in 2017 so far, and take a look at this pie chart right now. This is how many animated movies I've given a score so far, and the bad outweighs the good by 20-1. I hope that the rest of 2017's animated films picks up the pace, because 2017 so far looks like it's gonna be a disaster year for animated films. I hope that the rest of the animated movies this year, like Leap, the Lego Ninjago movie, The Star, Coco, and Ferdinand, will somehow improve the year, because at the end of 2017, in January, I actually want to do my own top 6 or 5 best and worst animated films of 2017 list, because I actually have quite a lot to say about all these animated films. I'm sorry I didn't talk about the other animated films that I thought were bad this year, because I didn't really have a lot to say about them. If I would have reviewed The Boss Baby, Rock Dog, and Spark separately, then I would have the exact same thing to say about them. I'm just going to give you all a little bit of an update before I start. I'm currently in the process of making scripts for 2 co-op reviews in my Sean's Network Reviews series, and I decided to hold on for a second before I do my top 10 favorite Unikitty episodes list, since I want to take my time, and I do want to get people to look at that script before I start production on the actual video, since I want to see if I could explain things a little more, or add some more things to some of my entries on that list. I decided to release my worst list without having people look at the script as a test to see if people would be interested in checking the script for the best list or not. As of right now, I'm not finished with the script for the best list yet, but once I do get the motivation to finish it, I'll send the script to some people so they could check it. As for Sean's Network Reviews, I have quite a bit of episodes in the works. I decided to delay the reviews that I said that I would do on Thundercats Roar and Ollie's Pack, since I haven't watched enough episodes of those shows to get enough of a good grasp on why I think that they don't work. But other shows I do have plans to review. 2 of them, which are co-op reviews with Supersonic Ward 15 and The Gem of 99, are both on Making Fiends and Robot Boy. Making Fiends with Sonic Ward, and Robot Boy with Gem. Both of these reviews are going to take a little bit of time in the scripting phase, since co-ops on anything usually relies on chemistry to make them work. And giving quick thoughts right now, one of these shows I feel mixed on, while the other has so many problems that I'm speculating that my co-op with Gem will come out after the co-op with Ward on Making Fiends. I also have plans on reviewing Puka, a show that holds up very well after remembering watching the show a lot when I was little, that I decided to rewatch a dozen episodes of. And also Kuku Harajuku, a show that I avoided like the plague after I watched one half-hour episode in 2016, due to how unwatchable I think the animation is. And going back and watching a dozen episodes with sunglasses on more recently, the show was much worse than I originally thought it was. And not only that, but on Memorial Day weekend of this year, me and my family members are going to be extremely busy, and that statement depends on when this video in particular comes out. So I decided to pick something easy to make a video about, and luckily in the palm of my hands, I found something very easy to talk about in a solo video. And I say this because the show that I'm talking about today, Kamp Koral, while I don't like the show, it's very easy to talk about because there's not much to really talk about with this show. I am technically late with the first impressions video, considering the fact that the show's first few episodes premiered in March of this year, while at the moment it's the middle of May at the time that I'm writing this script. But there are only 6 episodes of Kamp Koral so far, and just getting this right out of the way before starting this review, while I don't think that this show is good, I actually think that this show is bad in fact, the show is not the worst thing ever, nor is it even close to being the worst thing that I have or will ever review. Describing it best, this show is harmless, but that is for now since, as I said, it only has 6 episodes at the moment, and depending on what I think about the next few episodes when they come out, the show could either get better or it could end up getting worse. Thundercats Roar, for example, when the show's first 2 episodes were released online, I originally believed that it was in the category of just bad, since I did think that the first 2 episodes had problems with running gags in its animation. Then the next couple of episodes came out weeks later, and to me ranked the show from being just bad to awful. Or the opposite could be the case. I originally believed that both The Angry Beavers and My Life as a Teenage Robot were just good, but as I continued watching, I started believing that those shows were better and more interesting than I originally thought they were. But that really does depend. While I don't believe that Kamp Koral is nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be, it's pretty underwhelming if I'm being honest with you guys. And no, it has nothing to do with the fact that Nickelodeon defiled Steven Hillenburg's wishes, even though that ended up being revealed to not be the case. Rather, it had something to do with the premise, the animation style that the show was going to use, and the choice in the cast of characters in the show. You see, when the show was first announced in June of 2019, it was revealed what characters were going to be in this show, that it was going to be set in a summer camp, and the fact that the show would include aged-down versions of the characters that we've seen in the original series. And this was all that I could think about when I heard about the first announcement for this show when it popped up. I was wondering, didn't we already just get 2 shows that were set in a summer camp and had aged-down versions of characters not too long before this show was announced? And how was this show going to work in 3D animation? All throughout the rest of 2019 and into most of 2020, the rest of the announcements for Kamp Koral were rather silent. Basically, kind of like a Thundercats Roar type of situation, where we would occasionally get a photo or preview of what the show is going to look like, but the show otherwise would remain a mystery. Up until we got a small preview of what Kamp Koral was going to look like at the end of 2020 in a promo for Nickelodeon's Wildcard game, where we see a few seconds of what Kamp Koral will look like, and my first thought was, I knew that the show being in 3D was going to be a major issue, and that particular I knew it realization made its way to the preview that we did get of the first episode, as well as when I got around to watching the actual show. And while the show's actual quality doesn't match the sync with the problems with the animation or even the continuity issues, since I surprisingly didn't have too many notable bad things to bring up with the show, 2 things did keep it down to the level that it is now. Kamp Koral revolves around younger versions of the characters from SpongeBob SquarePants and their wacky adventures at Kamp Koral, that is heavily implied to be a prequel to SpongeBob SquarePants, despite continuity issues that I'll be getting into in a little bit. These characters include SpongeBob, Patrick, Squidward, and Sandy as the campers, Mr. Krabs as the camp director, Pearl as the newborn baby, Mrs. Puff as the scoutmaster and activity teacher, and Plankton and Karen as the camp chefs. Going into this show for the first time, I was actually expecting this show to have a lot of problems, since as a SpongeBob spin-off slash prequel, there were quite a lot of things that the show was going to do that weren't going to work, like the animation and problems with how the show tries to tell SpongeBob's origins. But after watching episode after episode after episode, I found that there were not too many notable things to comment on with this show. Oh, I think that this show definitely has problems without a doubt, but those issues that I have with this show are just salt on the open wound of what honestly would have been just a meh 5 out of 10 kind of show. In a way, the meh parts of this show kind of reminds me of what I thought of something like Smurfs The Lost Village, which I also didn't have a lot to comment on, except for the animation. Kamp Koral is kind of the same, but get rid of the animation part as a positive. Each episode that I've watched of this show falls into one of 3 categories. There are the episodes that are kind of annoying, the ones that raise a lot of questions, and the ones that I didn't have a lot to say about. They're just that. White noise. The animation in certain aspects did legitimately impress me, particularly the effects that they would use whenever SpongeBob or whoever else is on screen gets stung by jellyfish, but the rest of the series just feels empty of substance. Even in terms of entertainment value, it's perfectly in the middle with not a lot to say. It's not boring like I think that the Tom and Jerry comedy show or Alvin and the Chipmunks 2015 are, not as annoying as Thundercats Roar is, not as unpleasant as Ollie's Pack, not as infuriating as Robot Boy, and not as unwatchable as Kuku Harajuku. And it's not even really something that is enjoyable to watch because none of the things in the show sparks the enjoyable or interesting factor, which is what I thought about Nightmare Ned and Teacher's Pet. While I was able to watch all the episodes that are available of this show in one day and in one sitting, I got the impression of the episodes, aside from me saying was just me kind of feeling bored. No, not the kind of bored where I end up having to watch something interesting afterwards to make me feel like I'm anticipating to do that thing again, unlike how I felt towards the Tom and Jerry comedy show and even how I felt about Alvin and the Chipmunks 2015. Instead, it's the kind where I was wishing that I was watching a completely different show instead, and to get watching the rest of the episodes out of the way quickly. This particular aspect alone would have probably given this show a 5 out of 10, since its sit-through kind of show where I was able to sit through the whole episode would give it a 5 out of 10. However, there's the other aspects of this show that are actually things that really hurt the quality of the entire show, and those things are the continuity and the animation. Starting off with the animation to get this right out of the way, when Kamp Koral was first announced, alongside some of the characters that they were going to bring onto the show, the announcement that the show was going to be done in 3D animation was actually one of my biggest concerns with this series. Unless you are Pixar or DreamWorks, 3D animation on television always had their disadvantages, since television animation is usually given a lower budget than that of theatrical animation. That's why William Hanna and Joseph Barbera went from the original MGM Tom and Jerry shorts in the 1940s and 1950s, when cartoons were theatrical, to the limited animation of the 1960s when television became popular and was being used. And the limited budget of anything animated also applies to 3D animation. Earlier CGI cartoons like Reboot and Beast Wars end up looking extremely dated when compared to how cartoons are now, and others would fall into the uncanny valley or have a frame rate issue. To be fair, the animation in some of these cartoons would be their weakest element, and they would be saved by the writing. Even with some of what I think are some of the better 3D animated cartoons like The Penguins of Madagascar or Miraculous Ladybug, the animation is their weakest element. The only times when 3D animation could get really good is if they have a huge company like DreamWorks working for them, or in things like Fanboy and Chum Chum, as bad as I think that show is, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2012. 2D and 3D animation have their own different ways of executing something. 3D is able to show every angle of a particular character, can add humorous things just like 2D animation, and can be technically impressive, but is much more limited with expressions, unless you want to leave it unpolished and horrifying. And 2D is able to exaggerate and make wacky faces without falling into the uncanny valley, and is able to do exaggerated movements and moments without everything feeling sudden or the viewers questioning if there were frames missing. And that's the exact problem that I have with the animation in this series. At every turn, all that can be asked is, why this show wasn't done in 2D animation. Maybe it was to make this show stand out from the original series. However, something that sounds like a good idea in your head could end up becoming poorly executed when you put it into a series. Because both 2D and 3D animation are meant to be used and consumed differently, at least in television. There are some things that I think that this show does well. For example, on paper, the character designs look good, and they luckily translated very well into computer animation. And as I said, I really was impressed by the show's effects, and some elements of things like the backgrounds are rendered fine.
The problems start forming whenever exaggerated expressions and overly detailed marks make their way on screen. Hand-drawn animation is the best medium for exaggeration. They're usually the source of getting memes made out of. SpongeBob is one of the biggest examples of this. Heck, SpongeBob isn't even the only show that has memorable faces that were made. Ren and Stimpy helped popularize this, and OKKO did this quite a lot. In a 3D medium, this could very easily fall into the uncanny valley depending on if the character is well rendered or not. And this show has tons of moments where it does things like this and actually has a plethora of faces that could unintentionally come off as nasty looking or disturbing. The reason why the mouth extending larger than the face works in hand-drawn animation is because it's not as detailed as 3D animation, and you'd expect that the character would do that in that medium. And SpongeBob crying in the first episode looks very uncanny because of the looks on his eyes. And then there's the part in that same episode with SpongeBob being all stung. It looks absolutely horrifying, and that's because they're doing what the other SpongeBob series has done for years, and any hand-drawn animated show has done for years, by covering a character in pimples when that certain character gets stung or gets swelled up because of a major accident. They would do this to show that the character had an allergy side effect or got into an accident, or for comedic purposes. But the thing that this show doesn't really understand is that what looks comedic in 2D could become disturbing in 3D. And this show does the thing that the original SpongeBob series does by having the expressions go comedic way too much. And these particular expressions changes in a jump cut kind of way, and there's usually no smooth transition to some of these expressions. Whereas in things like 2D animation and other 3D shows of its kind, they animated faces going from one face to the other. I think I know why Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2012 often used 2D elements when it used the anime-esque faces, because those faces would be very difficult to animate when you're doing a 3D animated series. And the animation can also get very inconsistent. And I'm not talking about the expressions, which those are done for comedic purposes. No, when I say inconsistent, I'm talking about the animation quality of the show. There are several moments of this show where it goes from looking fully complete and standardly rendered for a CGI cartoon from Nickelodeon, to looking unpolished and not fully rendered, or looking incredibly fake. The biggest example of this is in the intro for the show, particularly with this frame. And the worst part of this is that this is the intro for the show. Flaws like this are going to be the viewer's first impressions of the show, that it looks like it came out of an early 3D video game cutscene. In fact, this screenshot right here looks like something out of Light's Camera Pants, which was released in 2005. And because a lot of the textures in this show look very unpolished, they end up looking very plastic, leading to the animation in this show becoming extremely unfinished, which also results in some of the expressions that this show does becoming even worse. When the preview for the first episode came out in January, one of the animators behind Kamp Koral said that Nickelodeon decided to release unfinished footage from the first episode, but after watching the first episode, as well as the other ones, I really don't believe that it's the case whatsoever. The show still looks unpolished and unfinished in certain parts, alongside the uncanny looking expressions. But the animation isn't the only problem with this show, and I don't even think that's the worst part of this show. No, that actually belongs to the continuity and how much this show retcons from the original series. Now, I understand that the original SpongeBob series is not really a show that has ever cared about continuity. The only thing that the original series cared about is making you laugh. And you know, that's completely fine. You could watch the original series in any order you want because it was episodic. Some of the continuity issues that the original series had was that the locations in which the characters would get to would always be changing or didn't have the other known building in the same shot. However, that's really the most that the original series did. The show still did have its characters stay consistent, and it didn't change the characters' origins constantly, and the show set up how the characters met. Something that this show did not take into consideration. I can understand why Patrick is in this show, since we didn't know how SpongeBob met him in the original series. Aside from one joke in the episode Secret Box, we don't know how SpongeBob and Patrick met, so I can understand Patrick being in this show. The other characters, however, I have several problems with. Now, I did say that not having continuity as well as not being good with it is fine, but there is a limit to that particular get out of jail free card. The original series was not that distracting with this problem since it had a plethora of jokes to keep you occupied with that instead of being distracted by the contradictions in that show. This one, though, does this with flying colors, to a point where it's distracting. And there's not even that many jokes to keep you distracted from the noticeable problems. Which, by the way, the jokes in this show are not even that memorable or even noticeable, and some in particular go on for way too long. And the show also doesn't know about what makes something humorous. In the preview of the first episode that we saw, the joke was that Patrick was stalling for a long time to keep SpongeBob and the others from jellyfishing, and the literal punchline to this joke is Patrick being a hypocrite, which followed up with another joke that went on for way too long where SpongeBob was trying to catch a jellyfish while talking to his mom, and the punchline to that joke is SpongeBob's mom asking him if he caught his first jellyfish yet. And the show also believes that characters making wacky faces and being hyperactive equals funny. While sure, these particular things would make younger kids laugh, for those who are older, the jokes in the show easily fall flat on their faces. You know how the recent seasons of SpongeBob, seasons 9B to 13, usually get criticized for how their humor consists of wacky faces and all of that? Which I disagree about because there are actually other jokes in those episodes besides doing wacky faces. Well, that particular criticism that people launch at the recent seasons of SpongeBob is actually the case in Kamp Koral. Whenever a joke isn't killed by the fact that they drag on for way too long, they're just making distorted faces just expecting them to get a laugh with no situation of comedy happening around it. But getting back to the continuity problems, everyone has complained about how Sandy shouldn't be in this show, since SpongeBob already met her in the original series. And yes, that is a major problem that already retcons something that we knew about in the original show. Not only that, but Sandy herself is heavily flanderized in this show. She's basically just SpongeBob and Patrick in this show, meaning that in certain episodes like Tag Your It, she joins them in their shenanigans, when in the original series, she was more down to earth and was heavily into science, as well as karate, and usually stayed out of their shenanigans. I understand that Sandy is a bit younger, but this is just not consistent with her character at all. Next, let's talk about Squidward. I was originally going to let Squidward slide considering the fact that, unlike Sandy, we didn't really know about how Squidward met SpongeBob entirely, unless you count the special Truth or Square where Squidward's garden gets ruined due to a pineapple falling on it. However, thinking about everything else, this is a particular problem that I need to address. Squidward is a lot older than SpongeBob in the original show. Considering the fact that in Truth or Square, there was a flashback where Squidward was working at the Krusty Krab while SpongeBob was a baby. And in the original Fry Cook, Squidward worked with Jim before he worked with SpongeBob, and from the looks on the flashbacks in that episode, it was set in the 70s, probably before SpongeBob was even born. So I have no idea how Squidward and SpongeBob could meet as children in the original show, when Squidward was already an adult when SpongeBob came into the world. Mrs. Puff and SpongeBob met in the original series in a flashback, And Mr. Krabs was heavily implied to be the oldest character in the original show besides the elderly characters. Heck, the original series specifically stated that Mr. Krabs was in the war, and Mr. Krabs opened up the Krusty Krab before SpongeBob was even born. And there are also other little things, like how Gary shouldn't even be in this show since we found out how Gary was adopted in the original series, and we got the origin of Krabs and Plankton and why they both hate each other and wouldn't work together ever again. This problem with consistency even expands to a lot of the writing decisions as well, and in one of these cases, the integrity got broken so badly that it spreaded a ton of questions both to this show and a little bit towards the original show in one particular episode. The episode Kitchen Sponge, and why exactly I think it's the worst episode of the show, at least at the moment. In this episode, Mr. Krabs forces Plankton to get some help from SpongeBob with the food stand to make the food more edible, so SpongeBob ends up making a ton of food that ends up becoming expensive, so he ends up making what would eventually become the Krabby Patty secret formula. Plankton has a realization that he could use this formula to take over the fast food world, but through a giant plot twist, we realize the reason why Sandy is in this show. This particular discussion about this twist is going to go into major spoiler territory, so if you don't want to be spoiled, click to the time code where I just talk about my big problems that I have with this episode, so you don't get majorly spoiled. So, near the end of the episode, Plankton takes a bite from the Krabby Patty that SpongeBob made and has a flash to the future where he could take over the world with him having a secret formula in his hands. Which results in a chase sequence where SpongeBob chases Plankton all across the camp until eventually, the formula ends up burning to ashes when Sandy brings a portable campfire to that spot on the camp. And through a huge plot twist, we find out that the reason why Sandy is in this show is because her future self sent her past self to summer camp. And if you're wondering, yes, because this episode decided to have a 2D sequence where we see Sandy talking to her past self, this is confirmed to be canon with the original series. This entire episode is a major contradiction to everything that the original series set up, and it raises so many more questions than not that I don't even know where to start. Okay, here we go. First question that I have, if Sandy was supposedly supposed to go to summer camp to prevent this whole thing, why wasn't Plankton already ruling the fast food world at the beginning of the original series? Going by this show's logic, in Help Wanted, Mr. Krabs' business would be in terrible conditions, since Kitchen Sponge implied that Plankton was ruling the fast food world by the time that SpongeBob met Sandy in Tea at the Tree Dome. Second question, didn't we already have an origin story about how the Krabby Patty secret formula was made in the original series? I mean, I know that Kamp Koral has entirely different writers and directors than those who have worked on seasons 4 and 5, but there is a way to proof check one of these episodes to see if something is going to contradict them or not. In the episode Friend or Foe, we got a backstory for both Mr. Krabs and Plankton and how they ended up becoming enemies. And we also found out about how the secret formula was made. It was made with the original ingredients on accident by Plankton, and when Mr. Krabs and Plankton started becoming enemies in the original series, they were also both kids. And in this show, they are both adults. So going by what the original series said, they should already be in rivalry with each other, considering the fact that this series is presumably set in their early adulthood. And third, and this is my biggest question of them all, how does SpongeBob know exactly how the formula is going to be made? In the original series, only Mr. Krabs knows about that, as said by the Sponge Out of Water movie, and SpongeBob forgets about the secret formula constantly in the original series. I was originally thinking about doing a review on this episode, and even talking about this show on Sean's Network Reviews, but I decided to abandon doing any other reviews on this show because there's barely much that I could say about this one. There's the obvious problems with how this show executes the animation and how it handles its continuity, but there's just nothing else to comment on. The show does have good looking effects, and the show does at least put effort into trying to capture the feeling of the other SpongeBob series, unlike what the Tom and Jerry comedy show did, but the rest of the series is just white noise, at least at the moment. If you guys want to check out this series, it won't hurt if you actually do check it out. It's just that there are better shows out there. If you do want to watch this series, be my guest. However, if you do want to see much better shows than this, I would recommend watching Kamp Laszlo instead, because Kamp Laszlo is basically this show done better in every single way. It's entertaining, and at the same time, it does have notable things to comment on. It may not be as good as the other show that Joe Murray made, Rocko's Modern Life, but that show overall is fun, and while it does have certain similarities to SpongeBob, over time it ended up forming itself its own identity, and I would also recommend watching Summer Camp Island instead of this show too. Heck, instead of watching this show that ages down characters, watch A Pup Named Scooby-Doo and Tiny Toon Adventures, because they actually do interesting things with their premises, and they have enough comedy in them for you to not be distracted by the continuity. While I am going to be watching the rest of this series to see if it gets better or worse, for now, I think that this show would be a 5 out of 10 as a series on its own, since I didn't have too much to say about this show on its own, but a 4 out of 10 for two of the things added, both as a SpongeBob fan and someone who has seen that Nickelodeon can do much better things with 3D animation. In all honesty, if this is the approach that Nickelodeon decides to take with all of SpongeBob's other spin-offs, then it deeply worries me about what they're going to do with the Patrick Star Show, considering the fact that it's Patrick's family members that they're probably going to mess up the continuity for. Okay, so there's not much that I could say about Kamp Koral. What videos am I going to make next? My next 3 episodes of Sean's network reviews on shows that are much more interesting to talk about. Goody!
Okay, this is going to be a little unscripted, but I'm going to give you a disclaimer before I get into the actual review. In this review, I won't show any footage at all. I won't even play an audio clip, mainly because Viacom are a bunch of copyright Nazis. But yeah, that's it. This is my whole review of the SpongeBob episode, The Googly Artist, with a few extra lines and no footage of the episode. Today I'm here to make my first ever review. I'm planning on making quite a few reviews. First, we are going to be taking a look at a SpongeBob episode, and no, it's not on One Course Meal or Pal for Gary. It's instead going to be on The Googly Artist, an episode that nobody talks about because it's overshadowed by so many other terrible episodes. Anyways, let's take a look at this train wreck. So, this episode starts off with Squidward taking an art sculpture of himself into the front yard until SpongeBob and Patrick end up in SpongeBob's yard, and SpongeBob and Patrick showed him what they made. After that, Patrick is devastated when he isn't as good of an artist as Squidward. After that, SpongeBob shows Patrick how to make a rock with googly eyes, and we get into my main problem with this whole episode. So, Patrick says he's an artist, and when Squidward is showing the critic, he takes Squidward's art hat, and then the critic takes a look at SpongeBob and Patrick's art. He says SpongeBob's art is lame, and Patrick's art is fantastic. Yep, you heard him right. He's saying that a rock with googly eyes is better than a sculpture of Squidward. I know it's this guy's opinion, but the episode is treating someone's opinion as if it's a fact. The art critic walks away, and Squidward actually makes a good point about Patrick's awful art. Then everyone wants Patrick's awful art because he has an artist hat. See what I mean by me saying how this episode treats an opinion as a fact? So, SpongeBob and Squidward go to work while Patrick is selling rocks. He runs out and attempts to make something new, but he doesn't get anywhere. Then he goes to the Krusty Krab and acts like an unlikable jerk, and then this happens. Patrick rambles on for so long, And then when Patrick says that Squidward is a genius, then he puts googly eyes on the Krabby Patty. Patrick, Squidward didn't tell you to put googly eyes on Krabby Patties. He told you to concentrate on your patty. Anyways, the art critic comes back and says Patrick's googly-eyed Krabby Patty is brilliant, and many people come in, and somehow Mr. Krabs hears all of the money, and he knows Patrick is responsible, and the episode ends on one of the most insulting endings ever. Mr. Krabs catches SpongeBob and Patrick says he's just following Squidward's advice, and Mr. Krabs says it was Squidward's idea. Like I said, Patrick, he didn't give you advice. He said to concentrate on your patty. Anyways, Squidward gets punished for absolutely nothing. What an insulting ending. Anyways, my final thoughts is that this episode was awful. The plot was stupid, there were few animation errors, everyone treats someone's opinion as if it was a fact, the story was unfocused, this episode is a ripoff of Artist Unknown, and this episode is completely rushed. I'm not kidding. Everything I told you was the whole episode. Even as an 11-minute episode, it's still rushed. I'm giving this episode a 1.5 out of 10. I think it's that bad. Somehow this episode doesn't get talked about that much. I know there are worse episodes than this, but I still hate this episode. I even disliked it when I was 11, along with Pet Sir Pat. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to leave a like, be sure to subscribe, rate, and comment. So that's it. Before I end this video, I would like to apologize to you guys for not showing proof in this review. The only reason why I haven't shown proof in this review was because I couldn't use any footage from Viacom, because they take down any video about them with footage. It doesn't matter if it falls under fair use or not. They take your video down. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and yeah. Before I start the review, I would like to warn you about one of these reviews. If I'm reviewing a cartoon or something, there will be major spoilers. So if you haven't seen the episode or the episodes I'm going to be reviewing for my Drake and Josh project, I set a link down in the description down below to watch cartoons online. So just a heads up. With all that said, let's begin. Hello guys, this is Sean S. here, and welcome to my first ever Pie Guy Rules inspired review. Today, I'm going to do a review on every single episode of Drake and Josh ever. I've been waiting for a very, very long time to do this, ever since November of 2015 came around. Before I got the idea to review Drake and Josh, I originally wanted to do iCarly first before Sam and Cat, but I guess iCarly is gonna have to wait until I'm done reviewing Drake and Josh. Here are the ratings. Good episode, meaning that the episode is well good. Okay episode, meaning that the episode is okay. And last but not least, Steak and Smush episode, meaning that the episode is bad. Oh, and one last thing. This is not trying to rip off Pie Guy Rules. This may be an inspiration, but it's not ripping off. As long as I'm not reviewing SpongeBob, then it's not ripping off. Anyways, with all that said, let's start the review. Episode 1, Pilot. Drake and Josh become stepbrothers. Fun fact, this episode and Dune Buggy are the only Season 1 episodes to air as of 2012. Anyways, my favorite part is the hot sauce scene. For a first episode of the series, this is really good. It's a great introduction to the characters. There's a lot of good jokes here, like Drake being in shock that Walter and Audrey are getting married. Drake writing a song called I Don't Want to Be Stepbrothers with Josh. The janitor's poem, The Toilet Don't Soil It. Drake saying, now it's my turn to throw up. The line, lamps don't think that fast. Let's not forget to mention the hot sauce scene. That made me laugh my butt off. I couldn't stop laughing at that scene. You gotta see that scene to believe it. Links down in the description down below to watch cartoons online. Oh, and by the way, that guy that teached Josh karate, we never see him again after this episode. But anyways, other than the funny moments, this episode also balances heartwarming moments as well. In the ending, when Josh actually tries to beat Buck, but he gets beaten up in the process, Josh is actually enraged because Drake actually hid his Miss Nancy costume. And in the ending, Josh actually is accepted by his own brother to be his own brother. Then they hug in the end. So yeah, this episode is funny, heartwarming, and a really good introduction to these characters. Episode 2, Dune Buggy. Drake and Josh receive a broken down dune buggy from Trevor, but are forbidden by their parents to drive it. Fun fact, Taron Killam guest starred in this episode as Trevor. Trevor is that guy who appeared in the beginning of the episode to give the dune buggy to Drake and Josh, and Trevor's first appearance got a hearty laugh out of me. It turns out that he was looking at the backyard all this time. My favorite part in the episode is Drake getting punished in the end. He actually got a deserved punishment in the end for not only disobeying his parents' orders, but also teaching Josh into lying. However, if Drake is really grounded, then why did he get pizza in the end? This is actually pretty similar to Kid Grounded from Henry Danger, where Henry gets grounded, yet he's still allowed to talk to his friends. Even if there was some goofs in this episode, it is still a good episode. Although this episode was pretty close in being okay. Even if Drake did get punished in the end, he still gets to have pizza, and Josh now has to serve Drake until he feels better. But thanks to the funny jokes and Drake getting punished in the end, this is actually a good episode. Episode 3, Believe Me Brother. Megan films sheepish shots of Drake and Josh while Susan, Ashley Drain, Drake's new girlfriend, flirts with Josh. Fun fact, this episode is episode 2 on Amazon for some reason. My favorite part in this entire episode is the ending. I'm going to go ahead and say it. This is a fantastic episode. This is definitely a good episode. Why, you may ask? Because just like in the pilot episode, it mixes funny moments with heartwarming moments. For the funny moments, in the beginning, Josh said, I wonder where our pizza is. And then Drake is like, I cannot believe I ate an entire pizza. Drake saying, 'cause she's pretty. And after Josh just says, fine, then Drake says, I think you're pretty too. And plus, this is the first time where Drake and Josh say their famous quote, Megan. Then there's the part where Megan films Josh in the bathtub. That was really hilarious. After Josh gets out of the bathtub, I think there was supposed to be a fourth wall reference where Josh was dancing to the music. I think that was. I'm not sure. Maybe that's a fourth wall reference. Another funny thing about this episode is when Josh makes up a Miss Nancy advice that replaces the word Susan with Poosin. Then there's Megan filming Drake looking at himself in the mirror. And now let's get on to the main attraction for this episode. Is this episode a Josh torture porn? Well, maybe. But at the same time, it actually works, because Susan is the villain in this episode. Susan actually makes it look like Josh is in love with her. Susan tries to make Drake think that Josh is in love with her by having Josh kiss her, and then blaming it on Josh, saying that Josh kissed her. Then by Susan giving him flowers and blaming Josh for trying to give her flowers. And finally, when Susan comes around, Josh makes Drake hide in the closet, and then Josh tries to get Susan to stop it, but Susan pretends that she doesn't like Josh. Drake comes out of the closet and he is fed up with Josh. But then later, Drake and Josh are at school, and then they present the video that they made, and they showed what happened earlier in the episode with Susan kissing Josh. And finally, Susan gets punished in the end of the episode. But here's my only problem with the episode. How come this episode hasn't aired in years? Episode 4. 2 Idiots and a Baby. Josh tells Walter that he and Drake will babysit his boss's son so that Walter can get a promotion. Fun fact, the title is a spoof of the movie 3 Men and a Baby. My favorite part is the band and Drake and Josh smelling the baby's diaper, and after Josh smells the diaper, he faints. So, is this episode as cute as a baby, or is it as stinky as a diaper? This episode is okay. There isn't anything horrible about the episode, like, when they were about to change the diaper. They don't really show anything that vomit-inducing. I mean, sure, there was the part where Drake and Josh and Megan were in the kitchen, but that was the only disgusting thing about the episode. Everything else in the episode is pretty bland and forgettable. There's just not that much for me to say about this episode, other than the fact that it's bland and forgettable. Also, there was one part where Josh said that he didn't know how to play the guitar. I think that was foreshadowing for the very next episode. Episode 5, First Crush. Josh gets his first crush on Kathy while trying to impress her, but he accidentally tells her that he can play the guitar, but he really can't. Fun fact, Erin Chambers guest starred in this episode as Kathy. Anyways, my favorite part is the Find a Way song in this episode. It's actually surprising to hear that in an episode and not just in the intro. Kathy is Josh's love interest that appeared in this episode. Just like Trevor from the second episode and the guy who teach Josh karate in the first episode, we never see Kathy again after this episode. In fact, a lot of characters disappear after this episode. What, did they move to another school or something? But on to the episode itself, I think it's a good episode. Although, to be honest, just like 2 Idiots and a Baby, I don't really have that much to say about it, other than the fact that I feel happy for Josh. There are funny jokes like Drake pretending to be Kathy, and the Find a Way song that plays in this episode. Episode 6, Grammy. When Megan, Audrey, and Walter leave the house for the weekend, Drake and Josh's dreams of a parent-free weekend are dashed when Josh's grandmother and Walter's mom, Randy Heller, comes to babysit. Fun fact, Grammy is played by Randy Heller, who also guest starred in Alf. My favorite part of the episode is the ending, when Grammy actually gives Drake his $20 back. To be honest, in the beginning of this episode, Josh's Grammy is really horrible towards Drake. Like, at the beginning of this episode, Josh's Grammy does not give Drake a good present at all. I mean, all she gives Drake is a free haircut thing. And in the first few minutes, Josh's Grammy puts a note on Drake's back saying, "Lazy punk." But Josh's Grammy is redeemed by not only doing something nice for Drake in the end, but how much she is really awesome in this episode. I don't know how, but she managed to beat Drake at basketball. I think this episode is definitely a good episode. However, there's one problem that I have with this episode. Much like in every other episode this season, minor characters disappear. Although, to be honest, there is a reason why Drake's band disappeared after this episode. Because they used fake tickets to go to that concert that Drake was not allowed to go to. And as Drake, Josh, and Grammy were exiting the office, the band is still there, so they must have gone to jail. But there's no logical explanation why Grammy disappeared after this episode. I mean, sure, she was going somewhere after this episode, but she never appears again after this one, which is pretty sad because she is an awesome character. But nonetheless, this is still a good episode, and a fantastic way to end Season 1. And that is every episode of Drake and Josh Season 1 reviewed. So let's take a look at our status for the season. So we have 5 good episodes, 1 okay episode, and no steak and smush episodes. From what you heard from the status for the season, I think it's pretty safe to say that Season 1 is indeed a good season. Because not only is almost every episode of this season indeed good, a lot of them pulled off some really hilarious jokes every second. I mean, wow. This is the first time I laughed this hard at a sitcom since Full House. Before we get on to notes, I'm going to count down my top 6 worst to best of the season. I always wanted to do this since I started this entire review, so without further ado, let's begin. Number 6, 2 Idiots and a Baby. It's not that I hate this episode, really, but it's just that this episode was pretty bland and forgettable. And plus, this episode doesn't have the funny jokes that other episodes this season has. Number 5, Dune Buggy. Even though this episode was a little close to being an okay episode, it's redeemed by the funny jokes that it has. And plus, Drake actually gets punished in the end. Number 4, and this is where the episodes are going to start getting really good, is First Crush. There's a lot of good things in here, like you actually feel happy for Josh. Hearing the Find a Way song in this episode, and Megan's whole snake thing. Number 3, Believe Me Brother. This episode does what future episodes would do absolutely wrong. Sure, it's a little bit of a Josh torture episode, but however, Drake actually believes Josh for what Susan has done, and Susan gets punished in the end. I wish those episodes did what Believe Me Brother has done, Yeah, we'll delve more into those episodes when we get to season 3 and 4, and trust me, they're not gonna be pretty whatsoever. Number 2, Grammy. Yeah, this episode does deserve a Grammy, am I right? And number 1 is the pilot episode. I just keep on coming back to this episode due to how absolutely hilarious this one is. I mean, this episode constantly tells funny jokes every second, and it's a great introduction to all of these characters that we came to love. Here are some notes that I absorbed from this season. There is an unaired pilot to the show. How do I know this? Well, because of the Drake and Josh wiki, and because of a user named Blame It on George. I heard that the unaired pilot shares the same connection with the actual pilot episode, so nonetheless, even if it did air or not, it would still be a good episode. Most of the episodes this season has not aired in years. Not even the great episodes like First Crush, Believe Me Brother, and Grammy have not aired in years. The camera quality in this season, at least in reruns, did not age that well. Some people might tell me, oh, it's an old sitcom, so it has the right to not age well. Well, most of the season 2 episodes aired in the exact same year as season 1. And those episodes had great camera quality. The camera quality in this season does not affect the episodes, but it just seems pretty off. And one final note that I have for this season is, of course, every minor character disappears after every episode this season. In the first episode, the guy who teaches Josh karate, he never appears after that episode. In the second episode, Trevor doesn't appear after that episode. In the third episode, Susan doesn't appear after that episode. In the fourth episode, Walter's boss doesn't appear after that episode. In the fifth episode, Kathy doesn't appear after that episode. And in the sixth episode, Drake's band, along with Josh's Grammy, does not appear after that episode. This is actually the season of every minor character disappearing after every single episode. Well, this video turned out longer than I expected it to be. I expected it to be like, 12 minutes? But no, it's actually longer than that. I'm pretty happy about that. Anyways, special thanks to Pie Guy Rules for the inspiration. Special thanks to Halo Fan HP00, aka Awesome Fan 1997 for the new intro that I have. And a super extra special thanks to Watch Cartoons Online, because if it wasn't for you guys, I wouldn't have found the rest of the Drake and Josh episodes that I thought I couldn't find. You know, with episodes like Really Big Shrimp or The Storm. So yeah, that was basically it.